if you ask kids that grow up in Israel, what do you inspire to be? You know, we had this joke about Jewish moms that they want their kids to be a lawyer or a doctor. Now there was a research done by, it was kind of like a funny research, but done by the business school, what actually children in Israel now inspire to be. And the result is that Jewish moms now want their kids to be startup entrepreneurs. They think it's a better journey and a more kind of like admirable journey for their kids. But if you ask children in Israel in 2019 what they want to be, they want to be Kfir Damari. 3 guys that went through a journey that inspired a full country. My kid, 10 years old, know more about the journey of Kfir Damari than he knows about his family. They were so inspired by the vision of 3 entrepreneurs in Israel that decided to reach to the moon. That started the journey of how to take Israeli innovation and Israeli entrepreneurship and bring Israeli technology and Israeli science to the moon. So here it's a great pleasure to bring Kfir Damari to the stage and share with us the story of Space IL. What was this journey to the moon?
Okay. So, my name is Kfir Damari. You hear me in the back? Yes. My name is Kfir Damari. I'm one of the founders of Space IL, and it will work out in a second. They say that USBs have 3 options. You try it once, you return it, and then you try it again the first time, it works. Okay. No, never mind. So we'll start. A few words about myself. I like to say, to those who don't recognize on the top left, the Israeli Scouts, I like to say that from early beginning I believed in being part of something bigger than yourself. I went to the army, to the intelligence forces, A200 unit. Although I'm going to speak mostly about space, I can say that my background is actually cybersecurity. I started a few organizations, a few companies in that field. I did a bachelor and master degree in communication system engineering. Today, besides Space I also have a company called Tabuki, which I'll say a few words about soon. And yes, let's start.
I was only an idea, a dream, a fantasy. I was born in a bar to 3 fathers. Soon, I was raised in my family. I had people who took care of me and helped me grow. And I grew and became stronger. When I met the president of our country,
Sorry for that.
on a mission, I will carry with me a micrometer to study the magnetic field of the moon. But one of my most important missions is to inspire our kids so they can dream and explore the world. And my mission begins today. A couple of weeks ago, I left home and got on a plane to head to Cairo. I had hundreds of talented people who worked hard to prepare me for this day. I waited long enough for this moment, and I am ready. Yalla, let's get to the moon.
So I'm going to tell you the story of Space IL to my eyes. I can tell that for me it's actually started on Facebook. A friend of mine called Yuval wrote on his Facebook wall that he wanted to open the Israeli team competing in the Google Lunar X Prize. I immediately told him, if you're serious, I'm in. Should be noted that we're like Facebook friends. We didn't know each other too much. We've met at a party. We had joint friends, for me from the army, from him for work. And we decided to compete in this international competition to land the first private spacecraft on the moon. We met, the 3 of us, Yariv, myself, with Jonathan. Jonathan's is our space engineer. He was working in the Israeli aerospace industries. Yariv, electronic engineer. I'm a communication system engineer. 3 engineers sitting in a bar. Sounds like a joke. Think about how to build a spacecraft. Again, sounds like a joke, but that's actually what happened. And we met the 3 of us in a pub in the city of Holon. I don't see people smiling here, but okay. Always looking for. There was one pub, as far as I know, in Holon back then. Now I heard that there's another one. And those pages are the actual pages that we drew. We try to understand what it means to build a spacecraft, what's the smallest spacecraft we can actually build. I can tell you right now that we've planned to build a spacecraft in the size of a Coke bottle, a really, really small spacecraft. You can see on the right the timeline. We're planning to do that by the end of 2012. You can see a smiley here. This is the basic design of the spacecraft. Those calculations are calculations that we did in order to understand what's the smallest size we can build. And back then, we looked at a smartphone and we said, okay, so here you have a computer that is more powerful than everything NASA had when Apollo landed. You have an electronic system, you have battery, you have communication systems, you have sensors, you have cameras, basically everything that you need. What's missing? Engine, fuel, propulsion, it's all the same thing. We need something that will take this to the moon, and the calculations on the left showed us it's around 1 to 4. So each kilo you want to take with you to the moon, you need 4 kilos of fuel. This weighs around 200 grams, even less. So we said 200 grams times 4 times 5 with that weight, it's a kilo. Just in case, we said 5 kilos, a size of a Coke bottle. That was the initial design. But what happens is, if in 2010 that was the initial design, we really quickly made something that will look better. I'll show you that in a second. Actually, the spacecraft became bigger. And the reason for that when we started to do the engineering, the smallest fuel tank we were able to find was roughly this size. And the weight of that fuel tank was 7 kilos. So now it's 7 times 4 just to take the fuel tank itself. And we moved from 1 fuel tank to 2 fuel tanks to 4 fuel tanks to bigger fuel tanks. And instead of a 5 kilo spacecraft, we have a 580 kilo spacecraft, which is a bit bigger. It actually took us a long time. Only on 2017, we were able to understand how the spacecraft is going to look like. We had the designs of the final spacecraft. It took us around 2 more years to actually have the spacecraft constructed, built, and ready for launch. We had a lot of memes over the years, and this is something that was sent. This is like what product asked us, and this is what the R&D actually constructed. I like to say to this that each spacecraft has its own goal. If the spacecraft on the bottom, which I really like, was designed to actually reach and land on the moon, the one on the top also had an important goal. Can you guess? Marketing. You want to connect everyone to that story, and until you have the one on the bottom, you need something to connect people to, and it looks to be good looking, for example. But another important thing is fundraising. Exactly as you can see, the one on the bottom doesn't have a place for logos, and the one on the top has. So it's really important to be able to raise the funds. So from this initial design of the spacecraft, it was designed over a CubeSat, 10 on 10 on 30 centimeters. The spacecraft became much bigger, and I will say that like one of the first meetings when we needed to register into the competition, we decided to register just a month and a half before the registration ended. And in order to register, you needed $50,000, and you needed to show the blueprints of the spacecraft. Now the registration was open for a few years. We decided just a month and a half before, and we realized there is no chance to build the full blueprints of the spacecraft. And in order to show that we're serious, what we need to do is to show that we have a winning team. and in a really short time, we managed to meet with the president of Tel Aviv University and the Weizmann Institute, and Itzik Ben Israel, who's also, organizing this event, but he's also the chairman of the Israeli Space Agency, and a lot of other hats, and we've met with the Israeli aerospace industries, and with that group, we were able to actually show the competition that we are serious. But I will focus about this design, about the meeting with Itzik. He was actually the first one in 2010. He looked at our design, and he said, okay, it won't be that small. It won't cost, in the beginning we said like around $8 million. He said it will be more like 80, but I'm with you. And he actually gave us a few stages. One of them was in an event in Globes, where we met Doron Landoy, one of our first volunteers that got us the first interview in Channel 2 in a week. And then he gave us another stage in Tel Aviv University, where we actually met Maurice Kahn, that became our chairman and our biggest donor. So it's actually this whole story of SpaceL in a way started here. But from this design, as I said, we've moved to a bigger one. As I mentioned, most of the spacecraft is the fuel tanks. Actually, I said 580 kilos, but if you take out the fuel, you get a dry mass of around 160. Most of the spacecraft is the fuel, and the 160, most of the 160 is the fuel tanks and what's holding them together. Beside the engine itself, so you have also solar panels, you have antennas, you have cameras, you have specially designed legs that we designed so we can actually hop. The initial mission was that you need to move over on the moon, and instead of building a rover, we just decided to light up our engine, go up and land, and save a lot of millions of dollars and a lot of years in the development. But this is basically the spacecraft. Let's see, 8 years summarized into around a minute. So we spoke about the spacecraft, but not just the spacecraft became bigger, the team became bigger. From 3 guys in a bar, we moved to a group of volunteers working on the project, and eventually in 2019 we got to around 40 full-time employees in SpaceL, another 40 working in the Israeli aerospace industries, and a few more in Weizmann Institute. Those you cannot see their faces are working in the Israeli aerospace industries. This is why you cannot see their faces. But really we got to an amazing team, and beside them we had hundreds of volunteers that helped us in the educational mission that I'll speak later. Beside those, we got the official support both from the Israeli Space Agency, from the Israeli aerospace industries, philanthropia, academia, commercial sponsors, educational partners, and many, many more that joined to make this dream into a reality. So it took us 8 years, but eventually we got to the spacecraft constructed. Before we shipped it, we did a lot of testings. This is a vacuum chamber where you take all the air out, you heat it, you cold it to make sure that all the different components can sustain the harsh environment in space. But we did a lot of other testings. And again, before we shifted, we did 2 more things. One, we added a time capsule holding 50,000 books in 37 languages, and also the symbols of Israel, the top 100 played songs in the history of Israel. We had pictures of kids that we met through the years. We had blessings that they send us, pictures that they send us, everything on that time capsules. And the one who designed this special time capsule calculated, as far as we understand, it's on one piece right now on the surface of the moon. We also added a magnetometer to study the magnetic field of the moon, and while we were descending, it collected information that is right now being analyzed in the Weizmann Institute. We packed it and shipped it. This is one of my favorite pictures. I'll translate to those who don't know Hebrew. It's a spacecraft in front of you. That's the container in the entrance of the airport on its way. We took it onto the airplane, and I'll stop here to speak about something else. This is not just the first Israeli spacecraft. This is also the first private spacecraft in the world. And the reason I'm stopping here is usually when you have a spacecraft and you're a country, you also have an air force. And if you have an air force, you have a lot of planes. You can take one of them and prepare to take your spacecraft. But we are not a government, we're a private organization, we don't have an air force, so we actually just bought a ticket for the spacecraft on our commercial flight, and some people say that there were oranges on that flight. As far as I know, it was medicine, but again, it took the spacecraft from here to Florida, and on its way, it's actually stopped on Europe, dropped some things from the plane and continues, and for people from the space industry, that just doesn't seem logical, okay? But this is what happened with our story. So we took it to Florida, to Cape Canaveral, to SpaceX facility. We connected it on top of an Indonesian satellite and got to the last testing. For those of you who don't find this is not how you test the spacecraft. This is just a joke, okay? See, you're all with serious faces. But eventually we launched it into space. SpaceX did amazing work. They dropped us exactly where they needed, and we started our journey. This is the first image we released. This was actually, we thought about planning, we planned this 8 years in advance. I'll speak about that later, but with the flag and the saying small country, big dreams, and Am Yisrael Chai with Earth in the background, and we were super excited for that. We started our journey. I won't go through all of our journey. We had a lot of maneuvers taking us farther and farther from Earth, but I will go into one of them, and that's the Lunar Capture. And the reason that's so critical, because all the other maneuvers we could fix things, but after such a long journey around Earth, we got to the point where we're actually meeting the moon. And when we're meeting the moon's gravity pulling us so strong that it's actually higher than the escape velocity from the moon. That means that if we would not stop ourselves, that the moon's gravity will just throw us into the middle of the solar system, and then we will never reach the moon. And we had one shot of making that maneuver happen. We had a backup one 50 minutes later, but that's it. If that's not working, we're in the middle of the solar system, and let's see how it went. So we're rotating, going to catch the moon. And again, we have to light up our engine and stop. You're going to see it from the top. You're going to see we need to rotate, use the engine in order to catch the moon. So that happened successfully a week before we actually started the landing maneuver. And I'm going to show you now two pictures that were taken just one after the other after this maneuver happened. That's the first picture. That's the second picture. And if you wonder what happened in between, as we had a screen in front of us, and that picture emerged. The first picture of the moon taken from the spacecraft. We were all super excited. We had, after that, a few more pictures. I said we had a lot of memes on the internet. People didn't understand what this is. So we also had someone doing this. So if you didn't understand, that's Earth from the moon. It looks a bit like a moon. And after a week around the moon, where we did maneuvers to get closer and closer, we actually got to the landing. And before we move into the landing, I want to show you something that we did. We checked how many launches were needed until a soft landing on the moon. So to the US, it took them 16 launches, the Russian 22, the Chinese 3. Should be noted, the Chinese had 100% success. It means that in the first two, they didn't want to land. Only on the third one, they wanted to land and succeeded. But Israel is the first country in the history that actually tried to land on the moon on the first time we get there. So it should be noted. And we get to the landing. In the beginning, actually before the landing started, we saw that there were a few parameters that we needed to fix. So while Bibi was going to sit in the hall to watch the landing, we're actually still fixing some parameters, sending that to the spacecraft, but eventually the landing started exactly as planned. We got another image from the moon that was super exciting. And I'm going to stop now and speak about what we're trying to create. So we didn't just try to create a spacecraft, a scientific mission to land on the moon. We tried to create a moment that will catch everyone in that moment, a moment people will remember in the future where they were. And in order to do that, we actually sat down 8 years in advance to understand what do we need in order to create that moment. You know, we envisioned in the early beginning, this is a Photoshop, it didn't really happen. We envisioned, you know, everyone in Rabin Square, if you recognize, standing. So eventually there wasn't Rabin Square, but we had a 38% rating on TV, which is the highest one is usually in the Israeli election, and the Israeli election had 33. We had 38, and beside that, we still had millions of people watching online from all over the world, not just people who care about Israel, but also people who looked at it as the first private mission to get to the moon. And we envisioned that moment, we tried to create. This is an illustration that we did. And again, we planned that 18 years in advance. You need to understand that we had to put a camera here in order to get that image. So it's actually got into the engineering work. So this is the illustration, and this is what we actually got. The legs getting closer to the surface of the moon with the Israeli flag. Incredible moment. That picture actually gave us another $1 million from the X Prize Foundation. Although the initial competition was closed, after seeing that, they decided to give us another $1 million. But during the landing, as most of you heard, Yehud, we had a problem. So it's not Houston, it's Yehud. But there was an issue with one of the subsystems in the spacecraft. We did get another image during the landing. The engine stopped working, it got working again, but instead of telling that, if I can take you to the last minute and a half in the story, this is how it was. So right now we're in a phase where there was an issue, malfunction, we lost communication, we got communication back again. But the team is right now trying to analyze what's happening with the spacecraft. You can see me, I already understand. Look at that image. That's my partner, Jonathan. And you can see me in a second turning back to my wife. She's holding her head. But I know already what happened. And And this image, when I told you look at it, that's the actual last telemetry where we got from the spacecraft. As you can see, we're moving 900 meters per second down, 130 meters forward, eventually around a kilometers per second to the ground, a bit higher than what we expected. NASA actually took pictures of the landing site a few days later, and you can see we made an impact on the moon, okay? But if we go back and analyze, what we've done. So this is the first Israeli spacecraft, but it's also the first mission of a small country to reach the moon. This is the first non-governmental mission to do so. It's the first rideshare, as I told you, the smallest spacecraft ever to do so, and almost without redundancy. And if we were talking about the team, and I told you we had around 100 teams, so I just saw on a National Geographic movie that they did about us, they said we had 100 teams. In Apollo, they had 400,000 people working on that mission. Okay, so just for comparison, and even $100 million project is nothing compared to other missions in the same scale. We got amazing support from all over the world. The head of NASA, the previous head of NASA, Buzz Aldrin, really, literally Europe everywhere. But I want to finish with this. I want to speak about that image that during all those years I said this summarized the mission for me. And that was the educational mission. We wanted to show kids that science is cool, science is exciting. We didn't wait for the landing. We actually had hundreds of volunteers. We've met with more than 1 million kids all around Israel. We did partnership with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Science, with Brain Pop, creating cartoon movies, creating books about the mission. We reinvented the meaning of educational marketing. We used all the tools that a marketer will use, but we used them in order to promote science and technology. We used them in order to show that STEM is exciting. We're actually getting questions from all around the world asking us how we can take this impact and also do that in other countries. We are aiming to show the kids that the spacecraft is not just built from, engine and solar panels. It's built from creativity, from teamwork, from overcoming obstacles, from devotion and passion. We looked at ourselves as different in that field of promoting science and technology because we believed we were doing that inspiration by doing. We're not talking about the fact that it's inspiring. What we're doing is actually doing something real in the world, showing it to those kids, and through that we're inspiring them. In the beginning we called it the Apollo effect, now we call it the Bereshit effect. And I can tell you a few things. One is before we announced we're planning to do another mission, we call it Bereshit 2, we got feedbacks from kids. As you can see, Bereshit 2 in Hebrew, and you can see that kids already built the next spacecraft. And I can also tell you a story that there were a lot of kids that were crying after we touched the ground. They were really connected to that story. But the fact that we didn't soft land, the fact that we hard landed, actually got them to speak with their parents, with their educators about the fact that, in order to about the meaning of success, about the fact that in order to succeed, you need to go through a lot of challenges and you need to go through them. And that was amazing conversation that would not have been if we would just soft land and everyone would say like. So last few things about the future of Space IL. We are planning to build the next mission. Right now we're thinking about what this mission exactly will be. About myself, so as I said, I'm still actively part in making the next step for Space IL. I also part of a team called a founder of Tabuki, works on the cyberspace. We're actually solving a problem in key management. If you think about the old world, there was a key who's controlling your asset. It can be command and control channels. It can be controlling digital asset. What we've developed is a technology that allows you to control that through a blockchain network. And that means that even if someone stole your key, you haven't lost control over your assets. And really the last thing is about dreams. And every entrepreneur has his own dreams. We had the dream of getting to the moon, but everyone who sat here had his own dreams, and you have your own dreams. And I was really amazed when I saw that picture for the first time. The word impossible actually means impossible, and it means two things. One is, even if you take something impossible, you need to break it down a little in order to realize it's possible. But the other part is, the only way you take something impossible and make it possible is if you do whatever is needed to make that happen. And I wish all of you that you will do whatever is needed to make your dreams come true. And really last, that's Or and Ma'ayan. And if a second ago I said that I hope that you will do whatever is needed to make your dreams come true, I really wish myself, but all of us, I think, that you will dream about things that will make the world better for our kids. And with that, I say thank you.